My nuggets, I'm going to focus on co-authorship because I was told that I could, Tim, and correct me if I'm wrong, focus on something that might be particularly important to me that might appeal more broadly, right?
Right, exactly.
So I'm going to talk about co-authorship. Let me start with, should you find a co-author? I'm going to talk about how you find a co-author, and then I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of co-authorship. So let me start with, should you find a co-author, okay? And this has a lot to do with the stage in your career, okay? So for example, you might be started at the beginning of your career, right? And you might be working with an advisor and you're looking at it as an opportunity to learn, which is great, right? So in those cases, I think,
I'm still making a mistake.
Yeah, sorry about that. And obviously that's the time that you want to necessarily do that. As you move into your career, as you sort of get your first positions, as you're trying to work toward promotion there, many schools have a need for single authored articles, and this varies widely. So it's very important that you know what the requirements are of your school and, maybe your subfield more generally. But many do require it. And of course, in those cases, you probably want to make sure you reserve a paper that you do not co-author with. You might consider looking for hungry scholars like yourself, meeting other junior people who are untenured, who have a time clock to worry about. I will tell you, in my case in particular, that was a big element. So I started publishing with my advisor, Willie, on much of this. And then I moved toward co-authoring with folks that were at my stage of the game. So for example, Viba was untenured at that time, Viba Gaba. Ronald was untenured at that time. And so, we were all in the same boat and working together. So, that's a valid strategy as well. As you move forward, you will start with PhD students and training them. So it turns out, not as young as that, but you'll be working with them and developing them, and they'll be natural co-authors. My advice to people is don't start too early with that, because that can be a very time-consuming, a big time suck away from publishing papers. But certainly it's a rewarding avenue, and so your stage of your career has a big element in this. Skill gap. Should you find a co-author? Well, do you need one? Right? Are you an expert in theory building? Are you a great empiricist? What is the medical field here? I have my, hang on one second, folks. I have to just. Okay, sorry about that. I was like that guy on that CNN. Yeah, please. So skill gap. If you're a good theorist, maybe you want an empiricist. The reverse is true. When I started doing medical, which I mentioned earlier, sort of thinking about medical devices, thinking about healthcare, the first thing we did is went out and got a doctor who was interested. Right, because it was in a field that was very specific, and we felt that our knowledge was not up to par, and needed a doctor to look through some of this data to say, is this legit? Are we seeing what we think we're seeing? That kind of thing. So, multi-method. If you're doing multi-methods, chances are you've been trained, you're really good at one method, you're probably pretty good at another method, and then it stops. So I know in my own experience, it has been very helpful to have people with different expertise on a paper. That said, I wouldn't start with multi-method papers early in your career, because you tend, qualitative, quantitative, you end up getting reviewers that have different opinions on that. But longer term, you can do that, and especially if you bring in somebody who is an expert. And then gaps in your data. Right. So maybe you got the skills, maybe you can be a theorist, maybe you can be, but you don't have all the data that you need. And in fact, Ronald and I we realized that we both could help each other by putting our mobile device data sets together. And, we published 3 papers as a result of that. So, sometimes it's just a matter about getting the data. And then personal preference. You have to enjoy the process. You have to enjoy working with a co-author. Viva joked at one point that she was talking to me more than her husband. So, you're in it. And we were on different time frames, right? I was here, I was in the East Coast at that point, and she was in Singapore. So we had a 24-hour cycle going, which is great. But it also means that, you live with this person for quite a while. So, some people like that, some people don't. And then, of course, there's coordination costs associated with all of this. And I find that 1 is fine, but 3 is okay. More than that, and I have all versions of this, is 4 has not worked well. A little too many cooks in the kitchen there. Okay, how do you find a co-author? So 1 is, I think, mutual identification. So this is, mutual conversations. You're at a seminar, you're at a conference, and you strike up a conversation about what you're working on, and you realize, wow, our interests are really close. Why not? Let's do this together. That happens at seminars. I will tell you that I got together with Viva. I was giving a job talk at INSEAD. I was a rookie at the time. And I did the virtual thing where you're in Fontainebleau and they beam in Singapore. And, during our one-on-one, she mentioned, corporate venture capital, big company innovation kind of stuff is something she was interested in. And before you know it, we were writing papers together. So this is a great way to do it. Of course, there's always colleagues at work too, right? They're just down the hall, and the doctor that I mentioned is at UCI Health. So, don't overlook those. Hard target search. So this is when you have a specific goal in mind for finding a co-author. And of course, we know that the power of weak ties. So who do you know in your network might do it? The benefit there being maybe you know a little bit about them, maybe you've come across them, maybe you know their temperament, maybe you know things about them that would make them a good co-author. And then, maybe if you're not immediate network, who your network contacts can introduce you to. So recently I was added to a paper midstream, and it was under review. The authors contacted my co-author to find out whether they could, what kind of co-author I was. Say, okay, how's he to work with, that kind of thing. So this can be a real mechanism for this. Cold calls is another one, although I've never either done this or experienced it. I guess it's possible, but I would argue that if you are going to cold call, you probably should warm up the possibility by contacting people they know and kind of working your way in. If you're a junior person going for this one, the big fish, right? You're going for, somebody really well known. I think you really need to do your homework in these instances. If you are building on a very specific paper of this senior person, and you can see the relevance, and if you're more junior, maybe have a senior person look at it first. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it, but here's where you really need to do your homework. And then people coming to you, it's nice to be asked. The danger here is that you say yes to projects because it sounds interesting. But you need to remember that, we all know this is a 2, 3, 4-year process until the paper's, from soup to nuts. So just because you're asked doesn't mean it's a good idea, right? And so, you need to want to think about those. And then lastly, the good, the bad, and the ugly of this. So a few things I think more generally to keep in mind. One is the short term or the long term. Are you thinking about this co-author for one paper, or are you thinking about a stream of research? Because obviously the requirements are going to vary based on that. Where are they located, right? Obviously, if they are halfway across the world, and hopefully you're comfortable working with remotely, of course we all are, had to be more or less now, that's going to be a factor, and it's going to be expensive to visit them. Singapore trips were lovely, but they drained my research budget quickly. So that's something to think about. And then another one is, I think, how many projects your co-author is involved with. So, often, you might be getting involved with somebody who's a real good publisher, right? They publish lots of papers in the field, but the problem is that they publish a lot of papers in the field, which means they have a lot of irons in the fire. So it's probably something to consider. Division of labor here, you might want to, when you sort of establish a relationship, map out who does what as much as makes sense. I find that this is partially organic. You can plan it and it's emergent. So I don't think you can legislate the whole thing from the beginning, and you want to be flexible. But, some division of labor is useful ex ante. And then, this one's a tricky one, authorship. And again, I think that this one is about being clear on authorship as much as it makes sense at the outset. So, if it's a paper that's well developed already and you're bringing on a co-author, that looks very different than if it's two junior people starting off at the beginning. So Viva and I agreed early on that we were going to do joint authorship, 50-50. And that ended up sort of driving a lot of the way we behaved as well. And then finally, some other things. It's good to have somebody to complain to. So you're not alone in it. I think you should really like the people you co-author with in general. My personal experience is you really do communicate with them very, you sort of become very close with them, at least in an academic sense. Sometimes, you're spending a lot of time with them. So it helps that you like the people you work with. And then be open, because often friendships can emerge. And I got to say, it is the most joyous thing when, your work turns into a friendship, and then that turns into another paper and even more friendship. So anyway, that's my nuggets for you on co-authorship.